to the news. Our top story today, a woman has left her husband, leaving only a note on the fridge saying, "This isn't working." When interviewed, the husband seemed confused, informing us he checked the fridge and it works fine. Okay. I said last video, I think, trust me about working on more goblin lore. So today we've got their architecture. A lot of you might think, there's no such thing. They're too primitive to have something that could be called an architectural tradition. On the other hand, anyone among you who might have studied ancient societies, prehistory, archaeology, anything from the late Paleolithic through the Iron Age, anywhere in the world really, or anybody that's done or studied any kind of bushcraft, might have a different opinion. An architectural tradition just boils down to people building the same things the same way for a very long time. Often even keeping buildings the same shape and size, even when they start using different materials. So let's look at a few very primitive architectural traditions and then decide which ones might best suit our goblins. The oldest house in British Isles is at a site called Star Carr. It's on what was once the shores of a paleo lake Flixton. They're Mesolithic, so Middle Stone Age, before farming. They're roundhouses, rather insultingly called huts. They're not huts. They're not thrown up just to have a place to sleep for a couple of nights of camping. They're actual permanent structures, many of which were lived in for hundreds of years uninterrupted. They're houses. The ground was cut, leveled, and packed to make a stable base with a wooden floor on top of it. The foundations were dug in with deep-set heavy posts with burned ends to mitigate rot. They were packed in with stones. They had low walls, a central hearth, and most likely a thatched roof. And on the British Isles, they kept making roundhouses of some kind all the way through until the Romans invaded. That's a 9,000-year architectural tradition. Okay. It's likely a lot longer than that worldwide, since the same central hearth circular buildings pop up everywhere, from the Haida pit houses in British Columbia to teepees on the American plains, the Inuit igloos in the far north, and that's just North America. In ancient Siberia, there's similar structures from the Paleolithic, some of which were even made of mammoth bones. Where was I? In Japan, archaeologists have found roundhouse-style structures relating to the Jomon period, which was from 12,000 years ago to 2,000 years ago. And another very long building tradition. It's always a circular structure with a single entrance and a central hearth big enough for a family of a half a dozen or so people. Another long-lasting and worldwide tradition is longhouses. You just love knocking things down, don't you, kitty? I'm going to hold that tail still. Longhouses. From the Balkan Neolithic settlements to the Iroquois and Huron nations in North America, to the Vikings in Scandinavia, to several Pacific Island cultures. One large structure to house an extended family or several families communally, with hearths running down the center line of the building, lived in, repaired, and rebuilt for several generations at a time, all over the world. They've been built from wood and shingled with tree bark. They've been built from bamboo and thatched with palm fronds. built on stone foundations with walls made out of thick wooden beams. It can even be argued that they still exist today. Through changes in purpose, going from a multi-family home to a meeting or feasting hall, to a seat of power where somebody sits on the throne, to a temple, a house of worship, a church. Again, it's a near universal form of architecture spanning thousands of years. It seems like when resources are scarce or the environment is harsh, or when defending your group or territory becomes a priority or a primary concern, people tend to build and live in longhouses. Okay, not all of these are widespread. Looking at Lepenski Vir, which is a site in Serbia, alongside the more famous fish people statues, they found elongate triangular foundations along a riverside. They're being called wedge houses. They're dated roughly 6000 BC and were occupied for hundreds of years at a time. The doors all faced the river. They had clay-lined floors with wooden structures above. They overlap with the earliest longhouse settlements in the area, so these fishermen interacted with the first farmers in their part of the world. Caves have provided us shelter for maybe longer than any other kind of home, but we can't really call that architecture, or can we? I'd say it depends on how much work goes into shaping the cave. Building dry stone walls to partially close or further secure an entrance. Building platforms to raise a flat surface off of the stone floor. Maybe even digging the cave out ourselves, whole cloth. Places like Derinkuyu in Turkey. Though that's the biggest one, there's actually over 200 underground settlements like Derinkuyu all around, I can't think of the name of the area, but all around that part of Turkey. All dug out by hand, all pre-industrial. Looks like we can make our own caves if nature doesn't provide one to our liking. Into the early Neolithic, late Mesolithic in the Levant, in the Middle East, what we call the cradle of civilization, we find what are called tells, hoyuks or tepes. These are words all relating to a hill. In the Americas, there are mound builder cultures where a mound or hill would be constructed to create a platform where a home could be built. But a tell is something different. In many instances, they would demolish a house and just build another house right on top of the ruins. After a few thousand years of laying new foundations on top of previous debris, the settlements, whether they were farms, towns, or whatever, developed into a hill. As an outlier to the rest of the planet, these were usually square or rectangular, often built mostly from mud brick, with the walls painted in lime plaster. Nice and shiny. Building primarily of stone would have been exceedingly difficult to transport and work the material. Wood was most likely more scarce and too valuable to be used for just a house. They'd rather use it for tools or weapons. So we have a lot of options. Now, what kind of houses should our goblins be building consistently for thousands of years? It might depend on how stable they are in their location, where they want to build. Are they under threat? Are they going to be attacked? What sort of population numbers do they have? What resources are available? A wedge house could be easily camouflaged. They'd only be visible if you come towards them from one direction, making them easier to protect. But those didn't last very long archaeologically. Once someone knows where they are, it'd be easy to attack the village from behind. A tell settlement would have to be very stable for a very long time to form. In a fantasy world, Caves, even if they dig their own, would entail competition from all the other creatures and peoples who prefer to live in caves. That leaves longhouses and roundhouses. They were the two most common and longest lasting in our own history, once we got out of caves almost altogether. So let's have a band of goblins, maybe refugees, a few dozen adults, and twice as many children with them. Wherever they're running from doesn't matter. The first thing they need is security. Whether it's a forest, a jungle, a swamp, a desert, the seashore, the tundra, they need security and they need to work together. So they built a longhouse. They share everything for a few generations, whatever they can hunt, harvest, farm, gather. They work together and defend the territory they've staked out for themselves. When their population starts to grow and they're secure in their territory, the longhouse gets a bit crowded. So families trickle out and start building themselves roundhouses. Eventually, the longhouse is just a meeting or a gathering place where crafters might sit around working together, where harvests might be stored or divided up between workers. Maybe it becomes a communal barn for their livestock. The good thing about a longhouse and roundhouse is that they can be built out of almost anything, and they work in any environment. They've been built in wattle and daub with thatched roofs, dry stone walls with corbelled roofs, mud bricks, pretty much anything. All right, so how far along are these goblins we've started working on? We know they live in roundhouse villages with a communal longhouse. We know from the last video they can raise chickens and ducks, with goats being their mainstay for resources. We also know, in any fantasy world, most of the other races, species, and societies don't particularly like goblins. This means they'll tend to settle in what would otherwise be very unlikely places. Deep, dark forests, marshes, swamps, and bogs, maybe open tundra. All the places where nobody else wants to be, so nobody else will want to take it away from them. I'll figure out what to work on next, and, well, I guess you'll see it when that happens. Talk to you next time.